who will tell us about their personal journeys with change and how it had an impact on their mental health. All four young people have been working either with the organization Young Leaders for Active Citizenship, which is YLAC, or are a part of our Sangath's Youth Advisory Board. We are very grateful to them for taking out the time today to share their stories and having these conversations in an online space, which can sometimes be daunting. Each young person will be sharing their story with us, which will be followed by a panel discussions and questions from the audience. I request all attendees to use the Q&A tab for asking questions to any or all of our panelists. You can also upvote questions that other attendees may have asked. Please do not use the chat option for asking questions as they may get lost or missed there. We do have a 20-minute Q&A session, so do keep your questions coming throughout the course of the webinar. We will also be live tweeting this event. If you want to join and tweet about the event too, please use the hashtag Sangath25 and tag Sangath India. So we can begin with inviting our speakers to speak and share their stories. First, I'd like to invite Pooja Prasad, who's working with Young Leaders for Active Citizenship. Pooja is currently in her last year of high school. She likes to understand how the mind works and why people do certain things. She is interested in social issues, mental health, advocacy, and challenges the social norms. She's also learning how to play the piano and enjoys painting and writing. We're very happy to have you with us, Pooja. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm just going to jump right into it. So the event that I want to talk about is the change from middle school to high school, which is very significant for a lot of people, from 8th to 9th grade when your entire life now revolves around the boards. But I don't want to talk about the intricacies of it, the academics or the education system, but rather the perception of the people within that education institution. I don't know if you guys had it, but our school had this girl touch, boy touch, or cooties, which I'm not very nostalgic about, but it was undoubtedly a major part of when I was a little kid. And we even had boy colors and girl colors, which were all the bright colors were for girls and all the darker colors were for boys. The gender binary sets in very early. What I'm trying to say is that there was a pretty big divide between the sexes. The teachers, of course, encourage us to talk with each other and become friends, but with the same breath would make you sit with someone of the opposite sex as a form of punishment. Obviously, we grew out of it, and the divide became friendship. So now, when we were in the 9th grade, the same friendship we had since we were in the 1st grade were received very differently. These were people that I essentially grew up with, but now that we're in high school, the platonic nature of them changed in front of the teachers. They didn't change for us, but the outside perception of them did. Everything you do was viewed from the perspective of distracting the boys or attracting them. Of course, it was very sexist in nature. Everything the girls did was to attract the guys and destroy their sweet little innocence, and the boys could do no wrong. Our teachers had really absurd thoughts, like the reason girls wouldn't braid their hair and put in a pony or just leave it open was to distract guys, and not because braids were uncomfortable or they just had a preference of how they wanted to tie their hair. We weren't allowed to wear our jackets unless we zipped them up all the way, because of course, open zippers are the way we attract boys. There was even this one time when one of our teachers bent down to look under the table and yelled at the girl sitting in front of the door, that was the first bench, and said that, and I quote, "She's giving a show to the guys in the opposite class." It was an awful place, honestly. Amidst all of this, I became one of the targets of their beliefs. I had a couple of teachers who'd start the class by essentially asking me to stand up and asking me what I'd done wrong. They were obviously referring to me talking to my guy friends from the other class. And they made sure to yell at me in front of the whole class, even though all I was doing when they came in was just sitting in my place and doing what I was supposed to do. Some teachers would even pull aside some of the guys that I was friends with and tell them to stop talking to me because I was bad influence. They were essentially talking about me the same way someone tells kids to stay away from drugs. I even had a math teacher once who, during a parent-teacher conference, made me sit outside and wait while she spoke to my mom about how I was having inappropriate relationships and destroying the guys and distracting them. The mom knew the truth, of course, so it was really good, thank God. I think what made things worse for me was that the people in class were also a problem. They weren't a problem inherently, but they were a problem for me. There's always that one person in high school who just hates you for no apparent reason. And for me, she decided that she would make me the villain in every girl's eyes. And the way she did this was she would go around the class and tell each person about how awful I was and how horribly I'd treated everyone and random things, awful things that I'd said about them. All of which were lies, of course, but the fact that I was a very reserved person who didn't really share her thoughts or talk a lot did not help. I was never, I never really faced her and accused her of doing things that she did because I always thought that she was also coming from a place of hurt. And I do believe that people deserve to be treated with kindness, even when they don't treat you the same way. So what ended up happening is that I had nobody in my corner. It got so bad that each day I'd just wake up and think about what illness to fake so that I didn't have to face the people in school. My grades started dropping. I lost motivation to go to school and even study. And when I did go to school, I'd just hold all of my emotions in for the day and I'd just come home and weep with a pillow over my face. Things felt awful. It was almost like I couldn't see past the things of that day. I could not plan about the future things that I wanted to do because honestly, I didn't think I'd make it that far. In school, when people have sudden changes or they lose their marks, teachers usually talk to them and pull them aside and ask them if something's bothering them and if it's something that they can help. But nobody did that for me. And I think it was majorly because they thought they knew. They knew what was wrong with me, and it was that I was distracted. And I wasn't really the type of person that would argue back or even just make my stance. So I thought that I was the problem. I fully believed that I was the problem and eventually hated myself. It was a really difficult time for me. But eventually I did make it out okay and did pretty well in my boards. Of course, I got really lucky and changed into a pretty good school. The teachers are actually pretty nice. And the friends I have now, I can have the most intense philosophical conversations while also debating about our favorite food. I get to be myself, a version of me that I'm actually proud of and not someone I was forced into and could barely recognize. But despite how these people affected me, I don't really hold any form of hate or resentment towards them. I did at an earlier time. But after having some time to be away from them and actually introspect, I see that it was not exactly, a cause and effect relationship. They were doing things that they believed were right, and hateful things transpired because, well, they were coming from a place that was driven from their experiences, and my reaction was fueled from mine. Everyone is just adapting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pooja, for sharing that. I think I really resonate when you say gender binary sex in very early, and I think your story was a testimony to that as well. What stood out for me is when you said people deserve to be treated with kindness, and the fact that despite what you were going through, you held on to that. Thank you for sharing. Now we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Manvi Tiwari. She is a part of our Sangath's Youth Advisory Board. Manvi is an 18-year-old mental health advocate from India, spreading awareness through her own life journey with OCD. She is currently the country executive in the Global Mental Health Peer Network and serves on the Lancet Psychosis, Lived Experience and Participatory Research Group. Over to you, Manvi.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Shivangi. And also to Pooja, that was beyond awesome and that was heartbreaking. And look at how far you've come. That's really commendable. So, talking about my story and the change that occurred in my life, which completely changed things for me, was that transition which occurred for almost all of us during March 2020 when the lockdown was announced. So, from going to school every day, interacting every single day with your friends, with your teachers, And then to all of a sudden, so much of negative news, so much of confinement, it was really hard to cope up with that. And I am a person with lived experience of obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety. So in March 2020, what happened with me was that, when it's like when your family stays together, it's very natural for two people, or in fact more people, to have disagreements, have arguments when they're living together. In my case, even when there was a very teeny tiny disagreement within my family, it would cause me immense anxiety. And it may sound irrational now, and even I knew at that time that it is irrational, but I had um, I had thoughts which I had thoughts which said that my family might break up. I had thoughts um, which made me think about very serious things that I don't always like talking about, and I'm still learning about how to accept them. So that is how it started, and I thought that it's a natural thing because it's the lockdown, and I'm not going out, I'm not able to interact with people. Around September 2020, there was a time when I lost 13 kgs because of anxiety. I vomited almost every day, sometimes 4 times a day due to anxiety. It was a complete turmoil in my chest because it was due to anxiety. I didn't know what was happening to me. I just felt like I want to just hide in a closet somehow and just think about everything that's happening to me. The outside chaos that was happening, like the pandemic, did not affect me as much as the things that were going on in my head affected me. And I was fortunate enough to have a family that understands what mental health is, understand where one needs to go when you have a mental health issue. And it is so because my mother once had a mental health issue, which is OCD. So I told my parents that I wish to opt for therapy. I wish to visit the psychiatrist. And they agreed to it. I went to the psychiatrist, and that is when I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. And after that, for the first 1 month or 1.5 months, my condition did not improve drastically. In fact, it just kept on deteriorating. After that, there was a time, I know everybody here is pretty strong, but I just want to give a trigger warning about this before I talk about it. So there was a time when I woke up at around 3 in the night and I thought that I don't want to live anymore. And people often interpret this feeling as suicidal ideation, but this was something different. This was not suicidal ideation. This was death wish, and death wish is different. So I had that, and I just wished that something happens, and I didn't want to live anymore. After that, things gradually started to get better. I kept on having my medicines. My hands would shiver real bad. My body would shiver. And I kept on having my medicines. I went to therapy. And contrary to what people normally tell me, that having medications causes a lot of negative side effects, nothing as such happened. And I was able to finally get over my OCD. And then I started to talk about it. I started to talk about my story because I felt like the first step, the least I could do to break the stigma regarding mental health is by talking about my story. So I started to do that, and gradually, I the most shocking moment was when my first article came out. And the moment it came out, I get messages from my own friends. I have been friends with them from multiple years. Until now, I had no idea that they've been suffering from any such mental illness. They've been suffering from any mental health issues. And all of a sudden, I receive messages from them, and they're telling me that, I've been suffering from this issue, and I don't really know how to tell my parents about that. And once I started to talk about my story, I was acquainted with so many problems that exist in the mental health care scenario in India. I was fortunate enough to afford mental health care. I was fortunate enough to open up about it. I was fortunate enough that my family supported me with it. There are young people who do not really have the option of affording mental health care for themselves because the prices of therapy in India are so high. And then there are people who don't have this option of telling their parents that they're suffering from a mental health issue simply because their parents dismiss it dismiss it as normal stress. But that is, I think, where the problem begins. And those are the problems, some serious problems that we really need to address. Um, so that was my story. And today, I am very happy and very proud to be serving in so many advisory committees, to have this opportunity to, in fact, speak at this webinar and share my story. So that is pretty much all my story is about. And I would just want to say that my parents supported me, my psychiatrist and therapist supported me. And if I didn't have these privileges, which shouldn't be privileges at all, if I didn't have them, I don't think I would be here, I would be alive, I would have come this far. So if I'm speaking at this webinar, if I am a part of Sangath, if I am whatever I am today, it's solely because of the privileges that I have. And again, those are not supposed to be privileges. Everyone needs to have access to mental health care. So that is pretty much all my story. And thank you so much for giving me this platform to share it.
Thank you so much, Manvi, for sharing. I absolutely agree that those seem like privileges which shouldn't be. But I feel it is really heartwarming to know that you used your experience to also create safe spaces for people around you to share their stories. And that is fantastic. Thanks, Manvi. Now I'd like to invite Sneha Barley, who works with Young Leaders for Active Citizenship. She is a high school senior from Bangalore with a passion for social advocacy, writing, and biology. She devotes her time volunteering at various women led NGOs across the country, all while managing to carve a place for herself in a niche of young queer writers. A published poet and a research fanatic, she's currently attempting to establish her institution's first queer straight alliance. The floor is yours, Sneha.
Thank you. And thank you, Manvi and Pooja. Your stories have given me a lot to think about. So, and that introduction was also lovely. So, I'm Sneha, and the thing I would like to touch upon would be my experience with my sexuality and how it has been perceived by the people around me. So, I will be alluding to a few things in this, but I would also like to bring forth a little trigger warning for self harm and internalized homophobia. So I was 7 when I watched Mulan for the first time. Yes, the Disney movie. And while I didn't quite know my 3 times table yet, I knew that something had changed by the time the movie credits rolled. My sister whined for another bag of chips next to me, but I couldn't care less. Something felt different. I turned to her to voice my concerns. Mulan makes me feel fluttery inside, I said, and I don't like that. My sister merely huffed in amusement before letting me know that it would be best to keep the thoughts to myself in this house. Back then, I didn't quite get her and decided to approach my mother to tell her what I thought of the movie. I promptly realized why my sister had cautioned me against it all those days ago. My mother frowned at me and told me that I was getting my head wrapped up in nonsense and that I should probably cut down on my TV time. At 7, I didn't think to argue with my mother. I wanted to be the best in her eyes, and so I would listen to her. The week that followed, I told my friends at the park about the movie, about how I felt, and they laughed. They asked me why I would prefer Mulan over Shang, the film's male protagonist. But he was clearly the man, they said. I didn't have an answer for them. I couldn't tell them why. How could I? I didn't know myself. They asked me to stop being weird. And at 7, I did as my friends told. I didn't want to play alone, and so I decided to keep the thoughts to myself. It was nonsense anyway. Every night, I used to read Peter Pan without fail. It was the one time I didn't need to make a conscious decision to not think. Every night, I read Peter Pan and I wondered what being one of Peter's lost boys would be like. What would it be like to never grow up, to stay as you are, to live the life of an outcast, but a happy one nonetheless? I'd find my answer eventually, though, at 11. In 6th grade, crushes were all the rage. My peers would huddle up in the back benches of the classroom and play the devious game of truth or dare. all in the hopes that a couple would be born out of their plotting. The boys would sit on one end of the table and the girls on the other, and I would watch from the sidelines. I was never invited to join, not since my classmates had accidentally stumbled upon my diary that I had kept hidden safely in my bag. A personal diary, of course. It was foolish of me to keep it hidden there, but to leave it at my house would have been even worse. And yet, I couldn't find it in me to be angry at this invasion of privacy. I mean, what was I expecting from a horde of sixth graders anyway? All I could feel when I was found out was fear. I was eyed strangely, and opinions regarding my behavior were shared, ranging from a healthy dose of, are you a, caution, there's a slur here, are you a dyke or what, to, dude, that's so weird. And that was only the beginning. I remember running to the washroom in tears and hiding until the bell signaled the end of school. Even on the bus ride home, however, my peers' words rang loudly in my head, and I found myself believing them. The following week, peers I once had, the ones I once thought of as friends, would lose their titles. What were once greetings of hey turned into arsid what's. Gentle teasing turned into mockery, and friendly shoulder bumps turned into harsh shoves and missing shoes after yoga class. It was as I'd always feared. A single slip and all my efforts at pretending had been in vain. I was a fool for writing down every desire of mine within those pages, in the hopes that no one would see them. I wrote about how I felt when I looked at Irene of Red Velvet. I spoke of the sapphic poetry I'd read that had touched me, because, oh, isn't it lovely to be free and in love? It was then that I knew why the lost boys never left Neverland. There was no pretending where Peter Pan lived. And now that I did not need to pretend, maybe I could be one too, a lost boy. All I was missing was my Neverland, a space that would guarantee me happiness even when I felt unworthy of it. 2 years went by and nothing seemed to change. Nothing except the intensity of my self-loathing. With every comment that was passed at me at school, a jab of guilt pricked underneath my skin. I felt guilty for who I was, and every time I did, I was convinced that the only way to fix that guilt was to let a small blade apply pressure and ooze it right out of me. 2 years went by, and every day I was inching closer to becoming a lost boy. Just a sadder, much different kind. A lost boy without their Neverland. Everything I once derived joy from in secret lost its allure to me, from queer books to my favorite musical artists. I loathed every feeling I had. Anger, joy, sorrow, it didn't matter. One feeling had ruined everything I had, and now in some twisted attempt at revenge, I would make sure that every feeling I had would cancel it out. I looked up remedies online, remedies that promised to make me more like the girls in my grade, more like the women my mother talked about, more like anyone but me. But of course, nothing stays a secret for long when it comes to my sexuality. The next day, my sister had come across several open tabs, Google tabs, claiming to have the cure to queer feelings, all because I had forgotten to double check before I'd gone to bed. And all of a sudden, I could feel the familiar ache of fear crawling up my ribs. Except this time, surprisingly, it didn't last long. I broke into tears as I watched my sister rise from my chair and wrap her arms around me. She patted my back before chuckling lightly and assuring me of the fact that she'd known ever since I was 7, ever since Mulan. It was the first time somebody had listened to me. And I think that was where it turned. Over the next few years, much changed and much didn't. I joined a forum for LGBTQ plus youth in Bangalore and soon found myself regaining a bit of my self-esteem with every passing day. I began consuming queer media, doing the things I loved without associating guilt with it. Of course, there was a part of me that was still desperate to change, but that what I felt, yet it was outweighed by a part of me that had slowly begun to embrace the feeling in the simplest of ways. My visits with the school counselor, too, were proving to be beneficial to a certain extent. Speaking of school, though, it never became easier, and it is unlikely that it ever will. Some things are just too deeply entrenched in the society, and even one person's will to change that isn't always going to be enough. Although I've changed school since then for high school, and I've managed to give myself a fresh start. And I'm certain that this time I won't need to leave my diary under lock and key. Not as long as someone's willing to listen to what I or anybody else has to say without prejudice or judgment. It's now that I think, turns out Neverland isn't a place. It's a feeling, a nameless feeling that encompasses love across the spectrum, dreams, faith, trust, and of course, like Peter Pan always says, a little bit of pixie dust. That's my story. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sneha, for sharing that with such candidness. And I'm sure it was a difficult experience for you, but the way you have articulated your story, I'm sure we were all really immersed and feeling how you were feeling. I think it would be worth pausing for a bit and maybe taking a deep breath before we go on to the next speaker. So I would encourage taking a minute. Okay. Thank you, Sneha. Um, Now I'd like to invite our last speaker, who is Sam. Sam works with us on our youth advisory board at Sangath as well. Sam is a non-binary undergraduate at Mount Carmel College in Bangalore. They enjoy volunteering in non-profit organizations and have contributed in the capacity of editor at publications such as Dear Asian Youth, Project Patriarchy, among many others. They are currently working part-time as an assistant operations coordinator at One Future Collective. Sam, over to you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Shivangi. And as she mentioned that I am an undergraduate student currently at Mount Carmel College. So I'm pursuing my second year of undergrad in psychology, English literature, and creative writing. And this is going to be relevant later, which is why I mentioned the course. But when I was thinking what to speak about at this event, and I was looking back at the changes that had occurred in my life, I realized nothing had drastically changed for the entire duration of my school life. And things began to change somewhere in like my PUC, which is 11th and 12th grade. So because right after 10th grade, right before 11th began, that summer break that we got is when I first came out to my cousin and my friends as bisexual. And although that's not a label I use anymore, but that was a label I felt comfortable to express myself with back then. There was no great moment of conflict. There was no personal struggle I had to go through in that manner, which I had expected to go through, because that's something that most queer folks tend to go through, is a great level of personal struggle, conflict. There's a lot of internalized beliefs and biases that you have to combat with. So initially, that's what I thought, that, oh, this is easy, I'm bi, that's that. And even in my first year of PUC, that's 11th grade, I came out on stage at one of the fests and I got congratulated for it. And there was no oppression as such at that point. And it took me much later to unpack the internalized beliefs that I had been constantly living with in my school years. because I remember I all through 8th to 10th, there must have been maybe twice, maybe thrice that I even hugged my best friends. And we were just never affectionate with each other because my school was a very trigger warning homophobic environment. Because at this one point, I remember during our morning assembly, we got told that girls are engaging in inappropriate activities, inappropriate touch. So henceforth, hugging is not allowed on school campuses. And that was so ridiculous. And back then we laughed about it. And I remember just standing while the national anthem is playing and just feeling the whole situation is ridiculous. But it was something that clearly had an impact, because I was internally somehow afraid that if I hug my best friends, they'll find out I'm gay and somehow they'll think I have a crush on them. But luckily, when I did come out to them much later, they were very, very supportive. And that's something I've had with me all through my life, is a support system, is a sense of community for people who have been able to accept parts of me that on a large scale the world doesn't. So then 11th happened, 12th grade arrived. That end of 12th grade, 2020, when the pandemic hit, there was the global crisis going around, and there was a personal crisis going around in my life back then, because at the beginning of 2020 is when I first started to question my gender identity. And this, unfortunately, like my sexuality, it wasn't like my sexuality. It wasn't as simple, it wasn't as easy. Here comes into play the struggle, the conflict, because we live in a binary gendered world. There are just two categories. And what I did is, instead of giving myself the category of girl or boy, I gave myself the categories of cisgendered butch person or a trans binary man. There were no other labels. I had to fit in one of these two categories. And here I'll just mention the importance the world gives to definitions, right? Because when you define something, that's how it remains. Then you're safe. Once you, there's no adaptation that has to occur to it consistently. Like if I present an apple to you, today it's an apple, tomorrow it'll be an apple. It has always been an apple. It could be a rotten apple, it could be a ripe apple. Once upon a time, it was a seed, but that's all it'll ever be, is an apple. And we love labeling people, we love categorizing them, because once we decide this is who you are, I never have to deal with questioning again. I never have to constantly have to deal with your reintroductions to me. So for me, coming to the label of non-binary was a bit of a challenge, shall I say. And I remember in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, I went with a friend to her sister's science exhibit. And there was a 9th grade boy over there who was demonstrating a science experiment. I don't even remember what the experiment was. I just remember he was pouring something into a beaker with his hands. And when I looked at his arms, all I could think about is, why you and why not me? Why do you get to have those arms? Why do you get to have that body? Why do you get to have that gender and not me? And that's something I still struggle with these days. That's one of the reasons I picked joining an all girls place, was because it would help with trigger warning dysphoria, because I wouldn't constantly be reminded of the fact that I was assigned female at birth, that the world is consistently going to label me as that, and I'm going to have to introduce myself as the other in every situation I come across. Even when I had to deal with changing my pronouns, which initially used to be she, her, I remember thinking, oh God, I don't want to deal with correcting 10,000 people in 10,000 situations, when I had to change it to they, them, right? Because that's the default that they would resort to, is she, her. And it would always be like, oh, by the way, I go by they, them pronouns. And this is something you'll have to do repeatedly mid-speech, like someone's talking and you interrupt them, and that's awkward, and then it draws attention to you, and then they go like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, and then it becomes about them. So there were a lot of little things along the way that my brain would just go, oh God, I don't want to deal with it, it's just too hard. So even in my first year of college, of degree college, I didn't tell teachers that I went by Sam, so they would consistently use my dead name in class, and they didn't know, right? And I just felt like I don't want to inconvenience them, which is something I feel a lot of queer people tend to feel throughout their lives, is I don't want to be an inconvenience to the world. because we've been so conditioned to just be nice, be soft, be in the name of kindness, just make other people's lives easier. So I remember the joy I first felt when one of my professors first used the right pronouns, because my profile picture on the app we were using on Microsoft Teams was they them. And the first time he used right pronouns, and then he checked in with me about my chosen name, and the sense of that's initial stages of when I discovered the wonderful word and the feeling of gender euphoria. And here I really want to reiterate what Manvi mentioned about privileges, because it is privilege that allows me to even label these feelings to you. When I say what I felt was dysphoria, when I say what I feel is euphoria, I can put these terms across. I can find the language to describe my experience because of my privilege, because of the level of education, because of the social framework, the kind of peers that I was allowed to have around me, the networks I was able to access, which is not something most people are able to navigate. So that was something that I did want to mention, is the part privilege has played in my life consistently, even with regards to my support system. But going back to 2020, the struggle with my gender identity, when I finally came to terms with my identity as a non-binary person, that was when I was dealing with my first breakup. And that relationship in itself was a lot to unpack. It was a very unhealthy relationship, it was a very toxic relationship, and we were toxic to each other. I cannot lay complete blame and be like, this person absolutely was horrible and they ruined my life, and that's I was the one victim in that situation. There are relationships that are like that, of course. There are abusive relationships of all kinds, but in this particular one, we fueled the worst parts of each other, and it was a storm of chaos. It was a constant cocktail of just feeding into each other's worst parts. And coming to terms with my gender identity while also dealing with the breakup, that was something that I found very tricky to navigate while I was cooped at home with my father, who I don't have the best relationship with. So there were conflict at home, there was conflict around the world because of COVID, there was conflict happening within me, within my mind. And one thing that definitely helped me, I would say, was finding outlets, finding things to do. So the first organization that I joined as a volunteer was Project Patriarchy. And around this time is when I first picked up internships, around September, October of last year. And they gave me a place to show up as something, right? To be someone, to be something, to give some kind of results, to do something with my time. So my first couple of internships, actually my most of my internships were unpaid, which again brings us back to the point of privilege, because most people aren't in a position to be able to take up experiences that do not fuel us financially, because there's no time for it. They have to support their families, and I've been lucky in that sense that I didn't have to deal with that. So yeah, I joined Project Patriarchy. I joined in the capacity of an editor, and that opened up a whole new world of international student organizations for me, where I would meet people from across all kinds of differences, right? These were people from different countries, different ages, they were in different kinds of school systems, they spoke certain different languages, and it was that common mission of that single organization that brought us together in one space to interact. And there again, I found a sense of community, and there was a great deal of personal satisfaction because I was able to do work. So I ended up just looking up and joining a bunch of organizations one after the other. At that point, when I discovered this, it was like, wow, this is a new world to me that has opened up. I don't have to deal with my mental health if I can just channel my energy here. So part of it, I will say, was unhealthy outlet, and part of it was a bit of an avoidance strategy. So I ended up joining this other organization as a beta reader, the Young Writers Initiative. I joined 2-3 more organizations as an editor, and this helped me build my resume, which helped me land the job I'm in right now, which at first, again, was a change I had to adapt to. So I first took up an internship at the organization I'm working at. So the way I arrived at the internship was strange because they put out a hiring for a full-time job role. I don't know why I applied. I'm a college student. I cannot possibly do a full-time job, but they had that option there, and you just had to submit a resume. And it was an organization I loved. I loved the kind of work they did. So I just submitted it sort of on a whim. I didn't expect to get till the final round. And then they spoke to me and they were like, what, we like your profile, but like, this obviously is a full-time role. We don't think this would work out, but how about you try out an internship, and then we'll see what we can figure out. And this was my first proper internship where I had to do like 25 hours of work a week. So my earlier internships probably entailed, say, 2 to 3 hours of work per day sometimes, or even like as little as like 5 or 6 hours of work per week. And going from that to going to 25 hours of work per week along with college was something that was incredibly stressful for me at that point. It was a sudden sense of I had to discover time management out of nowhere, which was something I was absolutely incapable of at the beginning. And I remember feeling this constant pressure, this constant sense that I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to make a mistake. Somebody's going to notice. It's going to be a problem. And I spoke about it with my manager at that point, who was incredibly kind and incredibly heard me out and helped me navigate that. So then I took up the job that I'm in right now, which again, at the transition period, I was very much like, oh God, it's a job. Oh God, it's adulting. Like, I feel like I was 14 yesterday. Now I'm 20. Now there's a job. I just don't want to deal with any of this. But this also gave me a slice of financial liberty that I had been lacking my entire life, because I had to constantly justify every tiny expense to my father. And that was just wreaking a havoc on my mental health. So this gave me that footing, that slice of financial literacy, that financial freedom that I really, really needed. Financial literacy is still something I'm yet to learn. But yeah, so I would say that coming to terms with all of these changes in the last 3 years, what really helped me was my sense of community. And I could not be more grateful for my mother, my cousin sister, and the network of friends that I have who've really helped me navigate through all these changes and really been there as solid pillars in my life. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam, for sharing that. I think when you said that we love labeling people so we never have to question them again, I think that really resonated with me and a lot of other people. I could see them nodding and putting things in chat. And it's so easy to forget that we are dynamic people who will keep changing. So thank you for sharing what you did with such honesty. We will move to the panel discussion now. I would like to thank all of you again for your really empowering, insightful stories. And I think all of you shared things that had different themes and so many nuances to it as well. What the first question that I have for all of you is, how did you cope with the events you have described, the different challenges you faced, and the life experiences you've had up until now? I'm interested to know what is it that helped you cope, and some of you have also touched upon some of these things while you were speaking. But if you could maybe mention what is it that whatever it is that you're comfortable mentioning about, what helped you cope, what helped you get through these times. Anyone can go. There is no particular order. Manvi, I see you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
So basically what helped me while coping with all the things that I was going through was alone time, like spending time with myself and thinking about and analyzing the situation that I'm going through currently. So that is what helped me. And at times it felt like, because I'm currently, I was at that time suffering from a mental health issue. And at times my family was pretty worried about me that I am spending time alone. What if it gets, they were basically worried about me. They felt like maybe I could hurt myself or something. So they discussed it with my psychiatrist, and he said that it's like, he said that I can understand that she is not into that self-harm spectrum right now, so you do not have to worry. And alone time, he told me, is the best when one is really suffering from something like this. So I think alone time and at times analyzing the situation, thinking about it. And another thing was asking myself this question, that what is the worst thing that could really happen? What is the worst thing that could really come out from this? I always believed in that quote, that the point of maximum danger is the point of minimum fear. And
Thanks, Manvi. That's actually a lovely quote. I think I'll take that with me today. Um, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, so I know I already touched upon the sense of community. So what I would like to mention is what I did on my own internally and externally is a lot of self-talk, because I would constantly address the past version of me, the current version of me, and the future version of me. And that's something I can continue to do, is address the past, present, and future versions of you, right? So when you look at the future version of you, at least when I look at the future version of me, I always look at it as future Sam is really, really proud of everything I'm doing right now. Even if it's this one day, this one thing, or if there's a problem, if there's an exam on hand, there's something that's causing me incredible amount of stress. This is not something that future me is worried about, right? 2 years later, 5 years later, this is not going to be something that's going to indefinitely cause pain. So to keep in check the temporariness, temporality, whatever the word is, to keep in check the temporary nature. Yeah, we can go with that. Temporary nature of pain is to constantly keep in check with the fact that you are a growing human being and your experiences will constantly change. And when you look at the version of you that existed in the past, it might almost be unrecognizable to you at times. So also looking at the version of you in the past with compassion is, I think, something everybody should do. We're very fond of sometimes calling it cringe or calling it, oh God, I was so embarrassing. But so what? We're united in all being cringe, embarrassing at some point. And at the end of the day, that was a version of you that tried their best to cope. So just look at them with compassion. Think of giving a hug to that version of you that tried their best with whatever they could. That's it from me.
Thanks, Sam. That was lovely to hear. Pooja, see you raise your hand as well.
I'm going to start with saying that Sam and Manvi had such insightful takes that they helped me a lot while I was trying to process everything that I'd been through. And of course, alone time was like the biggest thing, of course. And fortunately for me, that happened like before the vacation before boards, which was when everything was at the maximum intensity and everything was just at its worst. I got time to myself and I didn't have to deal with the people that were causing me pain. But I think it also came with realizing that these people are not inherently bad. They were just awful for my mental health. And they're coming from places of pain and they're coming from their experiences. And I can't just, completely cut them off because I think they're toxic, because they're not. They're just doing what they know best. Another thing that helped me a lot was a lot of introspection and conversations with myself, as Sam said. It was basically just drawing connections between, this event had this effect on me because of this previous event. And the way I reacted to it was actually a result of an event I had when I was like 5 or something like that. And drawing those connections really helped me understand where I was coming from, and even let me understand where they were coming from to a certain extent, because we grew up together. And I found that when you look at yourself as an observer, rather than someone who's like actively experiencing things, there's like a good balance between objectivity and subjectivity. And that really helped me process all those events and how I felt effectively. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Pooja. Just wanted to check, Sneha, if you'd also like to go.
I was just processing because I actually pretty much agree with Sam, Manvi, and Pooja, especially when Pooja said that nobody is inherently bad. If I had to talk about what I did to cope, in my case, there were a lot of people who were prejudiced, who bullied me as such. But back then, I resented them, and I don't feel guilty for resenting them. To sometimes I do, but I also have begun to realize that there is a need to look at things with an objective and subjective lens. Like Pooja said, there is no inherently bad person. Maybe their ideologies are skewed, and honestly, I sometimes blame them, but I don't also blame them for why they behave the way they did. Because sometimes in a society like this, oftentimes in a traditionalist conservative society, people from a lower middle class or a middle class background like myself, or the peers I went to school with, they're conditioned to believe that this is normal, and what goes beyond the boundary of normal, or what is normalized for them, is something that has to be ostracized. And whoever says something that they haven't heard in mainstream media or something, is that person isn't right. You can't sit with them, you can't talk with them. So as far as coping with such things go, coping with touchy issues like internalized homophobia or bullying, I used to resort to a lot of media, like music often, and a support group. Like, I feel like everybody has mentioned this, having a really good close support group that is able to empathize with you on a certain level, that is really important. Because I believe that the aim is not to understand the other person. You don't need to understand them, you just need to listen. A listening ear is what a support group aims to provide. And that was one of the things that really helped me finding people of that sort.
Thanks, Neha. I think I am very inspired by the resilience I've heard when I've asked this question, the resilience I've heard from each one of you, and the fact that all of you mentioned introspection and self-talk and conversations with yourself, which is it's not to be that reflective and introspective is a sign of being wise and smart to me. And I am it that gives me a lot of hope to see young people feel this way and go this way. Drawing on what Sam mentioned, that you to be able to look at yourself, to be able to look at your past self and the things you're going to do in the future with compassion, I do wonder how the events that you went through, the things, the stories that you've shared, how has it changed you as a person? What change have you observed in your past self to who you are today, and how it has contributed to who you are today?
A quick clarification, is this addressed to me or to all the panelists?
This is for all the panelists. Feel free to go ahead whenever you feel ready. Yeah, Manvi, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, what I think, last time I was muted accidentally, so please don't cut me off this time. What I think is that ever since this entire experience happened to me, I have become wiser. I know I do not have to directly jump to conclusions, and I analyze every situation that happens in my life, whether it is something serious or something not so serious. I have found a purpose. I know that I have got a great deal left to do with my life before I could actually become call myself hopeless or something like that, which often happens with people who are young. They think, they just kind of get lost, and they think that, "Oh, what am I supposed to do with my life? Like, other people have things that they want to do with their life, other people have things that they aspire to do, but I don't." This happens with a lot of young people, and it has happened with me. But ever since this happened, this entire experience, this entire transition happened with me, I have found a purpose, and I have come across some great people. And one more thing that I've learned is that things don't always things are not always like they seem on social media, or when you merely talk to a person few hours a day or few minutes a day. Because, like I said in my when I addressed earlier, that the moment I talked about my story, all of a sudden so many people that I talked to for so many years are telling me that they are suffering from issues, but I didn't know that till I addressed my story. So I think these are some of the major changes that I've seen in myself, some of the lessons that I've learned. So that is about it.
Thanks, Manvi, for sharing that. Anyone else would like to go ahead, build on this, answer the question? Please go ahead, Sam.
Can you just reiterate your question once?
Yes. So the story that you shared, how do you think that changed you as a person or made you into the person you are today? What changes did you observe in yourself?
Okay, so in my case, I would say that the person I'm right now, for one, I like this person, and I don't think I was too fond of the person I was before. And that's something that also helps me to live life without regrets, is taking stock of, do I like who I am right now? Fundamentally, of course, there are parts of me that I won't always cherish. There are parts of me that I'm insecure about. That's something we all cope with. But fundamentally, as a human being, as who I am right now, what I do, the way I live my life, do I like me? And the answer has been yes for the past 2 years. And that really helps me live without any regret. And everything that the past me did was to bring me to the future self of who I am right now. And the difference between that version and this version is that version, as we discussed earlier, as Sneha mentioned, was a bit of a lost boy. A lost girl is what I would go with, because so when I look at the past version of me, I somehow tend to see her as a she. It's always 14-year-old Simran, she, her pronouns, right? That's just how I view it. I'm not in any capacity saying this is how all trans folks view the version of them before they came out as trans. But I don't know, to me, it's just that's someone I need to protect, that's someone I show compassion to. And the person I am right now is who I am is because of her, because of the decisions she took, and then the decisions I have been taking. Everything traces back to just a journey of, it's an arc, right? It's a graph. Every action leads to the next one. And I think I still ended up losing a little bit of a track of your question, but to end my statement with is just that I really want everyone to know that there's going to be a point at which you like you, and don't stop trying until you get there. And once you get there, it's not a mountain also that you get there, you can sit and enjoy the view. It's a consistent journey. It's a consistent process of remaining who you like, but just get to the point where you like yourself. And when you get there, hold it, sustain it, fuel it consistently, and ensure you're able to live life like that, which is not easy to do, which is not always going to happen, but it's something we aspire towards, and that's a part of keeping yourself mentally healthy.
Thanks, Sam. That's really well articulated, if I may add. And I think you've done a great job of looking back and connecting the dots of who you were and who you are now, and how you show compassion to both of them. Pooja, I see you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Again, I fully agree with Sam and liking the version of you, because I think coming out of everything that I did go through, I think I like myself, and I like to think that I'm a better person now in a way. Like previously, I didn't really have very strong views, and I wouldn't really stand up for them. Didn't even stand up for myself when I needed to. I didn't share my opinions with other people because I was afraid that my opinions weren't the same as them and they would judge me and I would be an outcast. Everyone's afraid of being an outcast, when in truth you realize that everyone's an outcast and just trying to fit in. And I definitely now have strong views and passions, and I'm definitely not afraid to express them, even if it's absolute strangers. I will completely stand for what I think is right and will express them regardless of who I'm talking to and if their views don't match. And I don't feel the obligation to be someone that I'm not. Previously, I was a person who was based around people pleasing. I was trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect friend. When I didn't even recognize myself, it was like when I was alone with myself, I didn't know what to do with myself because I didn't know who I was. But now I do, and that's really exciting. And I do like the version of me that I am right now. And that feeling is incredibly freeing.
Thanks, Pooja. You've described quite a journey there. Sneha, I see you unmuted. Please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say I resonate with everything Manvi, Sam, and Pooja have said, especially the part about standing up for yourself and looking back at your past self. Because oftentimes in my journey, I have been subservient, I have been complacent. To me, it was more about being liked, it was more about fitting in. But like Pooja said, it's this whole concept of fitting in, it's this whole concept of putting labels on different things, be it who you are, who you want to be, all of it. And the change I observed in myself that I was most proud of was my confidence, my self esteem. I would say I lost it. But when I was small, I had self esteem, but it wasn't the kind that I wanted myself to have. I perceived myself through the eyes of someone else. And that changed when everything happened, you know. In ways, I found my Neverland, but in ways, I don't think we need to find our own Neverland. Just going back to that analogy, because it's a feeling. And when you're comfortable in your own skin, and that's so difficult, the idea of being comfortable in your own skin. I still wake up every morning, I look at myself in the mirror, and there are days where I feel like I am faking it all. I feel like an imposter living in my own body. That, but yeah, I think it's the whole idea of change can be scary, but like Sam said, it's an arc, and you can't rest at the top of the mountain either. So it's going to keep on going. And I think that's incredible of life and people, perseverance, even when you can't see it.
Thank you, Sneha. I think that was really hopeful to hear for me and for everyone who's watching this. Um, we can also take in some questions from our audience, and we have quite a few. And this would be open to everyone, whoever is interested in answering or has something to say. We can start with probably a question by Aryan Mukhopadhyay. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Who asks, how do you deal with the stigma that surrounds mental health? Yeah, man.
So, responding to that question, to be very honest, I stopped trying to deal with that stigma like some time back. This is a question I get asked very often because I have tried explaining to people when they tell me that, oh, why don't you just snap out of it when I'm having anxiety? Why don't you just stop overthinking? Try doing something, try watching your favorite series, try eating your favorite ice cream. But I have tried to explain them that that is not how it works. When you have anxiety, when you have any mental health issue, it's very hard to just snap out of it. But the only thing is that I realized that it's never really going to like, it's something that they themselves will learn over the years. It's not something that I can just automatically make them learn. So I stopped dealing with it. About the stigma, I think first of all one needs to deal with self stigma before we can deal with any other kind of stigma. So one way is to spend time with yourself and accept who you are. First of all, discover who you are and then accept whoever you are. That is the way. And besides that, I think it's really pointless kind of explaining people what a mental illness is and trying to explain them how it works, because they never get it. It's something that the younger generation is now, the upcoming generation is highly aware of. But I think you can maybe just like Sangath developed a series of what do you call them, posts that had some quotes and some instances that they used. You can send it to somebody who you're trying to convey it to, and I think that is one way through which you can convey to them that you're not really liking it. They are, what they're saying is a stigmatized lens through which they are perceiving a mental health issue. But besides that, after several tries, if they're still not understanding what mental health issues you're facing and how they work, then I think, like I said, I've stopped dealing with it quite some time back. So that is the only way.
Go ahead, Sam.
So I don't have a specific answer to this question. It's just that while Manvi was speaking, and when I first saw this question pop up as well, all I could sit here and think about is how the burden of education always falls on the affected and the oppressed. Because today, if I'm queer, I need to sit and explain to the entire society why this is not a bad thing. Here's ways to accept me. Here are ways I'm different from you and why that's not a threat. Or, for example, with someone who has mental illness, it becomes a constant series of them having to educate the people around themselves for them to create a society that's livable, right? To create an environment where they can sustain. They have to consistently relive trauma, consistently do the emotional labor of that education. And I just wanted to point out that this is just such an unfair thing to do. So the first thing I would like to just say to everyone attending this panel is, at any point, if you have arrived at a question that is towards a specific community of underserved people, oppressed people, ask yourself if this is something you can do research on yourself. I'm not talking about this particular question. I'm just saying the line of thought that this led me into is that at any point, if you have a question, check if you can answer it, if you can find out the answer yourself instead of directly approaching a person who is affected by it. And because as Manvi was saying, that as a person with OCD, that's a question she deals with consistently, directed specifically towards her. So I just like to point that out. And this is very different from holding space for someone with lived experience, is very different from expecting them to do the emotional labor of having to explain that experience to you. So yeah, that's my train of thought more than an answer.
Thanks, Manvi, and thanks, Sam, for bringing this up. I think it's very, very important to highlight this, not only the message that you just told everyone who's attending, but also when Manvi said that it's important to choose your battles and know how to explain, who to explain, and when to stop. So thank you both for that. Sneha or Pooja, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I personally feel that was pretty well answered because my answer would be very similar to Manvi and Sam's. Yeah.
All right. We have a couple of more questions. I'm going to take up this one. The person anonymously asked, I am a non-binary person. I would love for people to use my pronouns she/they in conversation. However, I'm hesitant to express this every time. I don't feel safe enough to correct them yet. Could you suggest a way I could communicate this in a social scenario? Go ahead, please. Sam.
So first off, I'd like to state that I completely get why you don't feel safe. As I mentioned earlier, that was something I didn't feel safe to do for a really long time. I think it must have been a solid thinking about doing it for 3 to 4 months before actually even trying it in my closest circles. So which is what would be the first point that I would tell you is try it within the closest circle. If you have any kind of friend support system, the person closest to you, this could be a best friend, this could be a sibling, this could be a teacher. So maybe just float the idea to them and mention it that, hey, I'd like to try using this. I don't know how it'll feel, but this is something I'd like to try. And it doesn't necessarily have to feel good. There are times when I've known queer folks who've tried certain pronouns and it just didn't seem to fit. So trial and error is the method that you consistently use. One of the first things you can do also is to put it on your social media, but that again brings into the question of safety, because it's so out there, it's so they're right there for the public. Your family can discover your profile. There are so many forces in this world that you don't want to disclose your identity to. So you start with the one that you feel safest towards, and then you build it off from there. You can even refer to yourself with those pronouns when you're thinking about yourself, right? Like, I don't know exactly how you think about yourself in your own head. Like, for example, if you're walking down the street, just use the right pronouns, use that chosen name instead of just like having that I'm walking down the street. Just float those pronouns in your head and see how they feel. Another place you could do this in is any kind of coffee shops or restaurants or wherever people get like their names called out or pronouns called out. With it's a good place to experiment as well. So with both regards to chosen names and pronouns, experiment to decide what feels comfortable. And if you absolutely lack any kind of support system, which is terrible, I feel everybody should have a sense of support system. Online communities are great for this too. If you don't have like people within your social circle, there's Reddit, there's a host of online communities where you can meet strangers who will still on some level validate the identity if you don't have people right around you offline to do that with.
Thanks, Sam, for that answer and for very practical ways of how you can implement it as well. Pooja, please go ahead.
So the question is something that I personally resonate with because I'm honestly not there yet either. I'm very hesitant in correcting people in conversation because when you have she in the pronoun, they tend to focus only on that and forget the second one. And they forget that it's there for a reason. But I'm definitely not confident enough to be like, hey, I need you to use both, but I want to be there. And one of the first things that I did was, as Sam said, say that to the closest four people in my life, my friends. And I know that they're very open to it because we've had conversations about those before. And I knew that they wouldn't look at it with resentment. So I felt comfortable telling them that these are my pronouns. And then the second thing I did was change it on social media and on Zoom so that people can see and I don't really have to verbally tell them. But yeah, that's the first two things, and I felt really good. Like just being there on screen so that people can see it is a pretty good feeling. Yeah, that's about it.
Thanks a lot, Pooja, for your input. I think since we have discussed quite a lot about labels and also breaking out of them, I think this question is very interesting, which says, what do you think of this perspective that definitions and labels help individuals find a space in a very diverse environment? They may identify with as many or no labels at all, but the definitions are not the inherent problem. I think the lack of resources to gain access to this knowledge is one problem factor. Sam, then Sneha, then Pooja, then Manvi.
I completely agree with the fact that labels on their own are in no way a problem, because on some level they really do help you find community. So labels can be something that brings you together with a sense of with a group of people. It can be something that isolates you from a group of people. I agree that it's all a matter of finding the labels that fit and even deciding if you require any, because I've known people in my life who've personally made it a choice to completely remain any kind of undefined, and that's what works best for them, right? That's something they feel most comfortable with. So the first question you ask yourself is not what labels fit me, it's whether I'm comfortable with the usage of any labels at all, and then if yes, what, and then accounting for the fact that labels are always can be changed, right? It's not a fixed price that's put on you at a supermarket store. You're not an apple. Your price can always change, so your label can always change that way. It's all a matter of constantly checking in with yourself. This is a label I've been using maybe for 10 years. Does it still fit, or is it just something I've settled into because the people around me now view me with this label? So now I can't tell them that, oh, I don't use this anymore because for the past 10 years I have stuck to this label. So checking in with personal comfort versus what you're doing because society settles into it. So that.
I'd agree with Sam a lot because initially, when you start off, especially if you're a very closeted individual and you have a lot of struggles within you, then you would like to settle into one label because it'll be easier to use in conversation. It's better than, sitting down and describing to somebody who doesn't quite comprehend it. Like, this is what I am, but they'll be like, okay, I've never heard of this. So labels, I oftentimes think people stick to for the sake of convenience. But oftentimes labels are helpful. They've been helpful for me. But I know a lot of people, just like Sam said, who would rather not have labels, or they can change it over the course of time. It's no fixed price tag, of course, to quote Sam. But I really do agree with what you've said in terms that it is the lack of resources to gain this knowledge as well. a lot of the times in my life, for example, if I take a personal example, in regards to my sexuality, when I came out, I decided to go with a lesbian because that was what most people knew. That was what everybody called me, with addition to a few slurs, of course. And they were not willing. I believe there's two factors. There is a lack of resources when it comes to the lower strata, and there is a unwillingness sometimes in a lot of traditionalist societies like ours, or conservative societies, or because from in my school, a lot of the families that these children, my peers, belong to, they had such stringent orthodox views that there was an abundance of resources. Trust me when I tell you that, but there was a lack of willingness. Even if I told them what it meant, what I was, what I felt like, what I would want to describe myself as, or I wouldn't want to, they would rather have a label stuck to it for convenience's sake. But still, that doesn't mean that you need a label or you don't need a label. There is nothing fixed. It's not a set rule. It's not set in stone. Even though a lot of the times when you're coming into it, it feels like it is. It feels like, oh my God, I need a label. I can't figure this out. My advice, just take it easy. Like, to everybody attending this panel, there is a hesitance when it comes to not having a label, but also it's your choice at the end of the day. That's my advice.
I fully agree with the view in the question and to what Sneha and Sam have said, because that's true. That's it. That's the honest truth. Labels, the whole purpose of labels is so that people can feel comfortable. And if their comfort lies in having none, that's what they should do. Because like society likes to tell us that the binary is better so that they know, and labels, they want labels to adhere to their comfort, and they lose the whole track of the point that it's not about them, never been about them. And I think remembering that labels are just about comfort and it can change. It's not fixed, as Sam said, and it's not about the people around you, but about the person themselves. And I don't really know what to say, because it's just the viewpoint that people have about labels is that it has to fit and it has to be fixed. Like the example of the apple that Sam used. The apple, fine, it's a fruit. We're dynamic people, and a fixed label is not something that we need.
So my answer basically is a mixture of everything that Sneha, Sam, and Pooja have said so far. Some things that I'd like to add is that I don't think labels are at all wrong. What's wrong is our perception of labels and definitions, as you said. We think, we and other people out there think that a person can only fit in one label. They can only have one label. They can only fit under one definition. No, a person could have multiple labels. They could be one thing and they could be another thing. They could fit into a lot of dimensions, and those dimensions could change in the future. Those dimensions could change completely. So I think that our perception of labels and definitions is what's wrong. And besides that, absolutely correct that labels and definitions are a personal choice and should continue to be a personal choice. They become wrong when somebody else decides our labels and our definitions. So I think that's pretty much my answer.
Thanks, everyone. I think that was very, very interesting for me to hear from young people discussing about what labels mean to them, whether they're important at all or not. And I think these are conversations that we often tend to forget having. And just the fact that you all spoke about it and brought it up made me realize how important and relevant they always will be. I think we have 10 more minutes before we close. So I quickly want to ask each one of you a question to close the webinar and to tie everything we've spoken about so far together. What would be one thing that you would like to tell older people who are watching the webinar about young people and or about young people's mental health? If you could summarize one thing that you would like, one message you would have for them in under 2 minutes, and anyone could go. Manvi?
So I think one thing that I would really like the elders to know, and not just the elders, basically everybody, it could be a person of our age as well, is that you know about mental health. When we are sharing a problem, we are sharing something that we are going through, we're sharing a hardship. We are not sharing it because we want in exchange a whole set of advice. We are sometimes sharing a certain problem with you because we simply want somebody to be there and to listen. We simply want to just rant about it, and we want somebody to be there and just lend their ears to us. So I think this is something that I really want our elders to know, because my personal experience, as soon as I tell them that I'm going through a certain problem, and I get this whole list of things I could do, things I should do, things I could have done. But so this is something that I would really like to convey to them.
Thanks, Manvi. Sam?
The one thing I'd like to convey to everyone, but especially elder people, is please don't assume that you always know what's best for younger folks, whether they're part of your family, whether you teach them in some formal institution, whatever capacity you meet young people in, whether or not you have interpersonal relationships with them. Please don't assume that you know what's best solely based out of your experience of how many years you've lived and what you've seen during the course of your life. So check in with them about what approach works best for them. There's no default approach to go to. So if someone's talking to you about their problems, a young person is coming to you, is trusting you enough with that, check in, right? Ask, do you need me to give you advice? Do you need me to listen to you? Do you need me to provide you with optional like resources that are out there? Do you need me to ground you and tell you that this is in fact something silly and you need to get your act together? So don't jump towards hyper validation, extreme invalidation, assuming you know what's best and doling out advice. Check in, take a moment to assess what they need by asking them, and then proceed with whatever approach works best, because 9 out of 10 times they will be able to tell you what they need from you, which is why they've approached you and trusted you for.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Pooja?
I think what I want to say is pretty much related to what both of them have said, but it's essentially just take it seriously. Take what the younger generation is telling you seriously, and don't jump to conclusions about what they need. Just ask them. Open to communication. Just ask them what they need, what they expect from you. And I think the older generation, I know I'm generalizing, but has the tendency to become very defensive and say that if they have, if their child has a mental disorder or some sort of difficulty, it's because they were not apt enough, and it seems like an attack on them, on the parents, which is obviously not the case. And just there's no need to get defensive. Just help your child, help the people around you. Just ask them what they need and take it seriously. It's never a joke.
I think Sam, Manvi, and Pooja have tied it up together pretty well. And again, I would just like to reiterate what I personally think would be great for every adult or to know is you must possess the capacity to listen. Before you possess the capacity to advise, you must possess the capacity to listen. It is the aim of somebody confiding in you is they don't wish to make you completely understand them. Their aim is not that you understand them, it's that you hear them out. I know a lot of people who have approached their parents and they've said something, and their parents would immediately just jump into a whole toll of gaslighting, or like Pooja said, getting defensive. There's a lot of ways the generation before us reacts to such things, but I have rarely seen parents listen. All it would take is a moment of listening. There is one quote that I remember from Peter Pan. I'm sorry, I know I keep bringing Peter Pan back, but it just seems so relevant. There's this little quote that says, "Stars are beautiful, but they may not take an active part in anything. They must just look on forever." But I don't think that's true. For once in my life, I disagree with Peter Pan. I think I think just sitting and listening is being an active part of somebody's life. Even if you're just looking on, you're being there as a support to them. That's enough. we don't ask for opinions, we just ask for a listening ear and take them seriously. Like, I think everybody has said that. Take every word seriously. And please don't try and bring your experiences every time into it, because oftentimes I have seen people say, oh no, my problems were nothing in comparison to yours. Trauma has no real linear scale. I would just stress on that trauma has no linear scale. Just try to think along those lines. That would be my suggestion.
Shubhangi, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. Thank you, Sam. I was just thanking all four of you for sharing what you just shared. I I completely and fully resonate with what you've said. It's coming from my own personal experience as well as what I've seen people around do. And I truly think that just being able to listen empathetically and actively makes a whole lot of difference, regardless of what we're sharing. So, thank you for highlighting and reiterating that at the end of the webinar. Um, I think I have had the most interesting and insightful conversation today, and I hope that you felt the same way as well. I would like to thank all of our speakers today for having these raw and honest conversations about mental health, being able to address different aspects of their lives, of their journeys, and being candid with us today. And a huge thanks to our audience for tuning in as well. We are really glad we were able to put this webinar forward because we believe that young people need to be at the center stage of such conversations about them. And this was our attempt to do so. I would just like to mention that the recording of this webinar will be made available on YouTube. Hope this conversation was enriching for you. The details of our next webinar in January will be announced soon, so I hope to see you all there. And thank you for tuning in today, and thank you for sharing, Sneha.